A Little House on the Prairie. It's gone from series to spin-off to occasional special. But as our man in Hollywood, Jim Brown, reports this morning, tonight's special on NBC closes the book on one aspect of the show with a bang.
Little House on the Prairie was sold to America as the perfect family show. Generations grew up watching its wholesome stories, but the real version has been carefully kept from you. And what actually went on during that show's 9-season run is disturbing, messy, and absolutely fascinating. Behind the smiles and heartwarming lessons was a production filled with bitter feuds, backstage chaos, emotional breakdowns, and shocking secrets the studio never wanted exposed. For years, audiences believed they knew the truth about this beloved television classic, until the darker story hidden behind the prairie finally started coming out. The show that almost never looked like this. Before we get into the scandals and the explosions and the feuds, it is worth knowing that the version of Little House on the Prairie that millions of people grew up watching was not the version its original creator had in mind at all. And the reason the show ended up the way it did comes down to one of the most explosive creative power struggles in television history. The story starts with a man named Ed Friendly, a television producer who had previously worked on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. In 1972, Ed acquired the film and television rights to Laura Ingalls Wilder's beloved books. He had a vision, a gritty, historically honest portrayal of pioneer life in the 19th century. He wanted the Ingalls children to look genuinely poor, dressed in rags, barefoot, and dirty. He wanted the show to reflect the actual harshness of frontier living rather than soften it for a comfortable primetime audience. To direct the pilot, Ed brought in Michael Landon. At the time, Landon had just finished a 14-year run as Little Joe on Bonanza, and NBC had given him an exclusive contract to develop new projects. When Friendly approached him, Landon agreed to direct on one condition, that he could also play Charles Ingalls. The deal was done. But it did not take long for the two men to clash. Landon's vision for the show was the opposite of Friendly's. Where Friendly wanted poverty and grit, Landon wanted warmth, family values, and stories that connected with the broadest possible audience. He refused to have the child actors walk around barefoot in the baking heat of Simi Valley where they filmed. He resisted the dirty, impoverished look Friendly was pushing for. In his own words to author Tom Ito in the book Conversations with Michael Landon, he said he had problems with only a couple of people in his entire life, and Ed Friendly was one of them. The tension came to a head quickly. Landon gave NBC an ultimatum. Either Ed Friendly goes, or he does. Given that Landon was the star and was under exclusive contract, the network sided with him. Friendly was pushed out of active production after the pilot, though his name stayed on the credits for the entire run of the series, and he ultimately earned around $40 million from the show. Landon noted that figure with barely concealed bitterness for the rest of his career. With Friendly gone, Landon had total creative control, and the show he built with that control became one of the most watched dramas of the 70s and early 80s. But total control, as it turns out, tends to come with a cost. The man behind the curtain. Once Ed Friendly was out of the picture, Little House on the Prairie was, for all practical purposes, Michael Landon's show. He was the star, playing Charles Ingalls. He wrote 48 episodes, directed close to 100 more, was the executive producer, and he made it very clear to anyone who worked with him that his creative decisions were not up for debate. Melissa Sue Anderson, who played Mary Ingalls, described him in her memoir, The Way I See It, as someone you had to catch on a very good day if you wanted to change anything he had already decided. She said it was very, very rarely possible to win a creative argument with him. He was an extremely talented man, she acknowledged, but he was also capable of being vindictive when people pushed back. He directed the pilot and continued directing throughout the run, eventually helming the series finale himself. He also wrote the series finale, which means the most controversial and dramatic decision in the show's history, the one that shocked millions of viewers, came entirely from his hand and nobody else's. More on that shortly. What Landon built with that control was something that stood apart from other family dramas of the era. He was not interested in easy stories. Under his creative leadership, Little House tackled addiction, death, disability, racism, assault, and alcoholism at a time when most primetime family dramas were still steering well clear of any of those subjects. Episodes often ended without tidy resolutions, which made the show feel more honest than its competitors. The show first aired on September 11, 1974, and within a few years, it was sitting comfortably in the top 20 of the Nielsen ratings. It aired for 9 seasons, running through to March 21, 1983, when the final regular episode aired. But by the time the show reached its final stretch, 2 things were happening at once. The ratings had started slipping, and the man running the show was dealing with personal chaos that had begun to spill into the set in ways the cast would not forget. For all his creative instincts and the genuine warmth he brought to the Ingalls family on screen, Landon was not living up to the same standards off camera, and the people who worked with him every day knew it. The affair that shook the whole cast. By the early 80s, Landon had been married to his wife, Lynn No, for nearly 2 decades, and they had 5 children together. Everyone on the Little House set knew Lynn and the kids. Karen Grassel, who played Caroline Ingalls, had been in their home and had eaten at their table. The whole cast had that kind of relationship with the Landon family. Then Cindy Clerico arrived on set. Cindy was 18 years old when she was first hired as a stand-in for Melissa Francis, the young actress who played Cassandra Cooper Ingalls. She was more than 20 years younger than Landon. Karen Grassel later described her in her 2021 memoir, Bright Lights, Prairie Dust, as a nice young woman who was tiny and slim and wore tight jeans. In that same book, Grassel wrote that Landon began openly talking about his, in her words, revived libido on set, bragging at the makeup table about the benefits of bee pollen. It did not take long for the cast to understand what was going on. Landon was having an affair with Cindy while still married to Lynn. The affair became the worst-kept secret on set. According to Grunge, Lynn No eventually found out, followed Landon and Cindy, and reportedly threw a bottle of vodka at his head. Landon initially suggested they might reconcile and even said publicly that he and Lynn would renew their vows, but that never happened. By 1980, the affair was confirmed, and the divorce from Lynn was finalized in 1982. Cindy was already pregnant when the divorce came through, and Landon married her in a small Valentine's Day ceremony at his Malibu beachfront home on February 14, 1983. About 30 family and friends attended. That marriage lasted until his death in 1991. Their daughter, Jennifer, went on to become a well-known actress, currently starring on the hit show Yellowstone. But the cost to the Little House cast was real. Karen Grassel, who was already in a difficult relationship with Landon over his refusal to give her a fair raise, found the affair deeply troubling given how well she knew the family he was leaving behind. Catherine McGregor, who played Harriet Oleson, reportedly found the whole situation particularly disgusting. And Melissa Gilbert, who had grown so close to Landon over the years that she considered him a genuine father figure, felt personally betrayed. Gilbert had lost her adoptive father and had leaned on Landon for that kind of support. She was best friends with his daughter Leslie. The affair put her in what she later described as a horribly uncomfortable position, having to work alongside the man every day while knowing what he had done to a family she was part of. She held on to that hurt for 9 years after the show ended, before they finally made peace in person. The woman who played his wife and got treated like a stranger. While the Cindy Clerico affair was rattling the cast, Karen Grassel had her own entirely separate battle with Landon that had been running for years, and it had nothing to do with his personal life. When Little House on the Prairie became a genuine hit, it was standard industry practice for actors whose contracts had been signed before the show took off to renegotiate for better pay. Grassel had trained in Shakespeare and on Broadway. She had real, serious theatrical experience before she set foot on a television set. She knew what she was worth, and when the show was sitting in the top 10 of the Nielsen ratings, she believed the moment had come to have that conversation. Landon refused. He told her the Caroline character was not popular enough with fans to justify a raise. He said her earnings should be on par with what the child actors on the show were receiving. Grassel later told People magazine in a December 2025 interview that she ran herself into the ground with resentment and anger and hurt feelings and pure exhaustion over it. She told the New York Post that she felt insulted as his co-star on a hit series. She told Closer magazine that when she went to him and said the show was in the top 10 and it was time to renegotiate, Landon simply did not want to pay her. And rather than responding to her directly, he began diminishing her screen time and cut her lines. In some episodes, according to various accounts, her dialogue was reduced to almost nothing. Grassel was afraid to push back openly because she did not know how to fight someone who had that much power on the set. She told People she just kept up her professionalism, played the part, and hoped things would change. But they did not, for a long time. In her 2021 memoir, Bright Lights, Prairie Dust, she described Landon as prodigiously talented and complicated, a man from a dysfunctional background who genuinely loved his crew, but who could become a bully the moment he felt his authority was challenged. She eventually got a raise much later in the show's run, but the years of resentment had taken their toll. Despite all of it, she made peace with Landon before his death. She told BuzzFeed in 2025 that she had only forgiveness and appreciation for his gifts and the opportunity he gave her. The two women whose careers he shaped most profoundly both said the same thing in the end, though neither of them could have said it while the show was still running. The sisters who could not stand each other. On screen, Laura and Mary Ingalls were devoted sisters. They shared a bedroom, survived hardships together, and the show consistently presented their bond as one of its emotional backbones. Off-camera, the two actresses who played them spent nearly the entire run of the show struggling to be in the same room. Melissa Gilbert, who played Laura, started on the show at 9 years old. Melissa Sue Anderson, who played Mary, was 2 years older at 11. Gilbert later said in interviews that from the moment they walked onto the set, Anderson was the boss of her and took that role very seriously. She was tough on me both off and on camera, but especially on camera, Gilbert said. She recalled Anderson physically hitting her during the filming of an early episode, the one where Caroline comes home with fabric and the girls reach for it, and said Anderson was strict and controlling from the very first day. The cold feelings between them only hardened as they grew up together on set. In her 2009 memoir, Prairie Tale, Gilbert wrote that she never found a real sisterly kinship with Anderson, that there was a distance and a coldness to her, and that she was not easy to get along with. She also reflected that Anderson seemed to live entirely within her mother's world, more controlled and guarded than openly warm. Alison Arngrim, who played Nellie Oleson and was close friends with Gilbert, wrote in her own memoir that when she first arrived on the show, Gilbert pulled her aside and warned her specifically about Anderson, using words that Arngrim quotes directly in the book as very dangerous, evil, and I hate her. Arngrim described Anderson as behaving like a well-trained prom queen type who refused to socialize with the rest of the young cast. For her part, Anderson addressed the tension in her 2010 memoir, How I See It. She did not go on the attack, but she acknowledged that she and Gilbert were simply very different people. In a 2024 interview, Anderson said she had been an extremely shy child and wished she had been more outgoing and easygoing about everything. She said she never wanted to get into trouble and was always afraid of headlines about bad behavior. In December 2025, the two women shocked fans by reuniting in New York City for the first time in decades. with Gilbert posting a photo from backstage that confirmed they had finally buried whatever it was between them. After more than 50 years, it appeared the Ingalls sisters had finally made peace. The episodes that made parents write angry letters. For a show that most people remember as wholesome family television, Little House on the Prairie went to some very dark places across its 9 seasons, and not all of those places landed well even at the time. The most striking example is the 2-part episode from Season 7, simply titled Sylvia. The story centers on a 15-year-old girl named Sylvia Webb, a new student at the Walnut Grove School who has physically matured faster than the other girls her age. A group of boys, including Albert Ingalls, spy on her through her window. Her father, a cold and emotionally distant widower, blames her for attracting their attention. He warns her to bind herself tighter so the boys will not look at her. Then, one day walking home, Sylvia is attacked and assaulted by a masked man. She becomes pregnant and does not tell anyone what happened. When she collapses at school and Doc Baker discovers she is pregnant, the town gossip machine, led by Harriet Oleson, immediately assumes Albert is responsible and spreads it around the whole community. Part 2 sees the situation spiral further. Sylvia's father, consumed by shame rather than compassion, calls her promiscuous and decides to move the family out of Walnut Grove rather than deal with the scandal. Albert, having discovered who really attacked her, tries to help her escape. They plan to run away and get married. But before they can, the molester, who turns out to be the town blacksmith Irv Hartwig, a man who hid his crimes behind a friendly face, tracks Sylvia down. In the final confrontation, Sylvia is fatally injured, and the episode ends with Albert devastated and the whole town in grief. For a show airing in prime time in 1981, this was genuinely shocking subject matter. So, of course, letters poured in. Some viewers praised the show for having the courage to address assault in a serious way, when most television was still completely silent on the topic. Others were deeply uncomfortable with the idea that children sitting in front of the television at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night were watching a teenage girl get assaulted, stalked, and physically threatened across 2 episodes. What makes it genuinely complicated is that the episode was not exploitative in its intent. It handled victim blaming and community shame in a way that was, for 1981, fairly unflinching. Sylvia's father blaming her for being pretty, Mrs. Oleson spreading gossip rather than showing compassion, and the whole town treating her pregnancy as a source of scandal rather than her assault as a crime, all of that was being held up as wrong. But whether that message was appropriate for the time slot and the audience that show attracted is a debate that still runs today. The end of the show, the rage of one man. After 9 seasons, something happened that determined exactly how Little House on the Prairie would end. And it was not a creative decision made in a writer's room. It was a phone call that never came. The show's ratings had been sliding in its final years. After spending years in the top 20 of the Nielsen ratings, by season 9, it had dropped to number 29. So NBC made the decision to end the series. And rather than call Landon and tell him directly, the network simply did not put the show on the fall schedule. Landon found out the show was over the same way the public did. Melissa Gilbert later described it clearly. He wanted to demolish everything because he was so angry that NBC never called him to tell him the show was officially canceled. She said that after not just 10 years of Little House, but years of Bonanza before that, it was just a disrespectful thing to do to him. NBC eventually offered Landon 3 television movies to wrap up the series properly, which he accepted. The first 2 were Little House, Look Back to Yesterday, and Little House, Bless All the Dear Children, both of which aired in December 1983. The third was the finale, Little House, The Last Farewell, which aired on February 10, 1984. It was Landon who wrote and directed The Last Farewell, and in that film, he put his anger directly into the story. A land developer named Lassiter arrives in Walnut Grove, claiming legal ownership of the land on which the entire town sits. The residents fight the claim and lose. So rather than hand their homes over to a man who cares nothing about what those buildings mean, the people of Walnut Grove make a decision together. they blow up everything they built. All of it. Their homes, the school, the mill, the mercantile, everything. The townspeople in the story were doing exactly what Landon was doing in real life. They had built something, given it everything they had for years, and someone who had no real appreciation for it was about to take it over. So they destroyed it themselves first, on their own terms. The line between the story and the man telling it could not have been thinner. The night they actually blew it up. What made the finale of Little House on the Prairie unlike anything else in television history is that the demolition of Walnut Grove was not a camera trick or a special effect. Landon actually destroyed the set with real dynamite. There were practical reasons for this, as well as emotional ones. Producer Kent McCrary later explained that the deal Landon had with the original owners of the land required him to return it to its original state once filming was complete. Dismantling every building by hand would have taken enormous amounts of time and manpower. Blowing it all up was faster, cleaner, and considerably more efficient. But Melissa Sue Anderson later recalled Landon telling her directly that the main reason he decided to blow up the town was so that no one else could ever use the sets after he was done with them. Both things were true at once. The church and the Ingalls house were the only two structures spared. Landon reportedly felt it would cause too much upset to destroy a church, and the Ingalls house was too iconic to demolish. A family named Ivar, whose father, John, had played one of the characters in the series, actually took the Ingalls house home with them at the end of filming, rescuing it from the destruction. A replica was later put up in its place, but both the original and the replica were eventually destroyed, the original taking a fire in 2003 and the remaining structure lost in a wildfire in 2018. For the cast, watching it happen was not like watching a set being torn down. The actors were not present for the actual explosions, for safety reasons. They arrived the following day to find the town already destroyed, and even knowing what was coming did not prepare them for how it felt when they got there. Melissa Gilbert described it in unforgettable terms. She said that for a few minutes at a time, members of the cast would be holding it together, and then someone would start crying, and then everyone would start crying, the cast and the crew alike. She said the crew had watched it get blown up the day before and had been standing in the rubble, and that when the cast arrived, it was genuinely their last day together in a place that had defined most of their professional lives. Gilbert said that Landon had once told her years before that people would be watching this long after all of them were gone. Seeing what was left of Walnut Grove that final morning, she believed him. Landon told the New York Times in 1984 that the whole experience was a catharsis for the cast and crew, that the actors had become deeply attached to their own buildings over the years, and that there were a lot of tears. He called it a good, strong, pioneer ending. That is probably the most Michael Landon sentence ever spoken. Why it stayed off the air and what people got wrong. In the decades since the finale aired, a persistent piece of mythology has built up around Little House on the Prairie that is worth setting straight, because the story people have been telling is more interesting than what actually happened. Many viewers, and even some who worked on the show, have repeated the idea that the finale was so dark, so violent, and so far outside the spirit of the original series that NBC refused to rerun it. The implication in a lot of retellings is that the network pulled it, that the finale was essentially erased from the record because it upset people too much. The reality is more straightforward. The finale did air on NBC on February 10th, 1984, and it did get rerun at least a couple of times after that. But networks, choosing which episodes to put back into syndication, naturally gravitated toward the lighter, warmer, more family-friendly installments from the earlier seasons rather than the 2-hour finale in which an entire town gets blown up and the show essentially ends in grief. The absence of the finale from heavy rotation in syndication, combined with its genuine emotional intensity, fed the legend that it had been banned or suppressed. It had not. It was simply not the kind of episode that fits comfortably in a Saturday afternoon time slot between other programming. There is also a specific factual correction worth making about one common version of this story. Some theories claimed the show was taken off the air because of declining ratings, and that Landon destroyed the set in frustration at NBC. That second part is only partly accurate. Landon was absolutely furious at NBC, and Gilbert has confirmed the anger. But it is also well documented that there was a straightforward contractual reason for the demolition. The land had to be returned to its original condition. Both motivations were real, and both were operating at the same time. The truth is not that it was pure rage. It was rage combined with a genuine obligation, and Landon being Landon, he found a way to turn an obligation into a statement. What comes next, and why the fight about it is already starting? The original Little House on the Prairie has never really gone away. All 9 seasons, along with the 3 finale TV movies, are currently available on Peacock, and the show is still broadcast in over 100 countries. For something that ended in 1984, its cultural footprint is remarkable and entirely undimmed. But the story is not over, because in January 2025, Netflix announced a brand new series based on Laura Ingalls Wilder's books. The show is set to premiere on Netflix on July 9th, 2026. It is produced by CBS Studios and Anonymous Content, with Trip Friendly as an executive producer. That name will mean something to people who have been following this story because Trip is the son of Ed Friendly, the original producer who was forced out of Little House by Landon more than 50 years ago. The Friendly family is now producing the show that Landon's version inspired, and doing it without him. 10-year-old Alice Halsey has been cast as Laura Ingalls, the same age Melissa Gilbert was when she first played the role.
ABC News exclusive with actress Melissa Gilbert, and George, you sat down with her.
Yeah, I did. Of course, her husband, Timothy Busfield, has been accused of being charged with this.
Luke Bracey plays Charles Ingalls, the role that defined Landon's entire public image. The series began filming in Winnipeg, Canada, in June 2025. The reaction from the original cast has been more measured than you might expect. Melissa Gilbert told Deadline in February 2025 that she had no issue with the new adaptation and believed there was plenty of room for someone else's interpretation. Alison Arngrim explained that the new series is not really a reboot in the way people are imagining. It is not going back to Walnut Grove, she said. It is going back to the books, to the actual stories Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote, rather than the fictional universe Landon built around them. Arngrim, never one to miss a joke, told the outlet that she has been saying for years that she is finally old enough to play Mrs. Olsen now, so someone should call her. What the new series cannot have, no matter how much money Netflix spends on it, is the actual set. Landon made sure of that in 1984. Walnut Grove is gone. The church and the Ingalls house that were spared from the dynamite were both eventually taken by fire in 2003 and 2018, respectively. There is nothing left for anyone to walk back onto. And maybe that is the most fitting end to the story of a show that was built from the very beginning by one man's refusal to let anyone else decide what it was. Michael Landon built it, controlled it, argued over it, had his personal life unravel inside it, and then personally made sure no one could ever have it after him. So, was Little House on the Prairie really the wholesome classic you remember? Or was it always the disturbing version the studio never wanted you to see? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.